Thank you very much, Dr. Duminda Munidasa, President CCP, as well as Professor Tilak Veeratna, my friend and colleague from the Department of Medicine, who is co-chairing today. Thank you, CCP President and Council, for inviting me to do the first book club session for this year. It's a pleasure for me to just walk in because this must be the first time CCP had a function in Gaul where I did not have to do the chief organizing duties. I just had to walk in today. It has been a kind of a surreal type of experience, just walking in when everything is organized. So thank you very much. And then to do the first part of this evening, I've chosen to speak to you about one of the greatest books ever written. That's the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it's also considered one of the strangest books ever written, and I will explain to you why. Now, to understand the context of what's in the book, it is important for us to look at the broader issues here. So during this talk, I'm just going to briefly touch on who this author is in terms of as a big figure in the history. And then what is this Stoic philosophy which inspired this great man in his life? And also the concept of journaling, which we'll briefly discuss. Now this is an equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. In the ancient Roman Empire, there was it was usual for great emperors to have statues of them made, usually on horseback, etc., and larger than life figures. There were about 22 of these made at that time, but this is the only one which is surviving. And why it is surviving is also an interesting story, why this one survived and all others disappeared. This is on the Capitoline Hill. This was placed on this hill till 1990, when it was thought that it was no longer good to hold it there because the statue was being damaged by weather. So they've now taken it and placed it inside what's called the Capitoline Museum in Rome. So if any of you are visiting Rome, this might be a worth figure to see. Apparently, this is considered a great work of art. This horse and every muscle of this horse and the teeth and everything has been made in such a way that they consider this a great work of art. Anyway, coming to his book, why is it considered a great book, a truly great book? Because Marcus Aurelius had only one mission, a mission that all of us share. He wanted to be a good person, a good man, and he was striving for it. And his thoughts, he wrote down on where he was falling short and how he wanted to become better. Marcus Aurelius was not a perfect human being. The inspiration for the book was his own shortcomings and what he thought about life. And when I speak to you about what impressed me, I am not for a moment saying that I have those values. I am also striving to develop those values in me. And that could be the mission of all of us, striving to develop to be good human beings. So it's like a guide, his own guide towards becoming a good human being. Of course, it's strange because he never wrote it for an audience. Now, all of us write books. Anybody would write a book for an audience. So he never had an audience. All he did was what's called journaling. Over a period of maybe about 12 years, the last 12 years of his life, when he was in Rome as well as when he was on various military campaigns, he would sit in his tent and write on parchment or maybe even wax tablets his very personal thoughts on how human beings could become better. He wrote it to himself so that he could read, reread. When he fell short, he can become better. He had a guide for himself. he never imagined that people would read his book 2000 years after, and maybe someone in Gaul would stand and talk about his book 2000 years after. That was not his idea. So that's why this book has no name. It just doesn't have a name. Initially, now what happened was, you will wonder how did this keep on coming? Well, he was the emperor after all. So when he died, people saw these documents, that the things that he had written down. Then of course those were translated, and priests kept on writing and translating those over the past 2000 years, and then of course it came down to today. So it was originally written in Greek. For instance, I thought everybody in the Greco-Roman Empire wrote in Latin, but apparently he wrote in Greek, because Greek is a more poetic, beautiful language, and it has been subsequently translated to Latin and other languages. So it never had a name, so people used to initially title it For Myself. Then of course, somewhere along the way, this term Meditations picked up. So today we call it the Meditations. There are many translations of the Meditations, and if any of you are keen to read, one of the best translations is considered to be the one by Gregory Hayes, who is a professor of literature in Virginia, who has come up with one of the most user-friendly translations. So coming to the book itself, actually it's not one book. He wrote his journaling. Now, journaling is not quite keeping a diary. Keeping a diary means you write what happened that day. That's what we are used to. But journaling is you write maybe one sentence, maybe a paragraph about how you feel about things, how you want things to be, how you want things to look like in the future, what is upsetting you, etc. So he wrote altogether, there are about 12 books, and all of that has been put together to produce this one book called Meditations. Now, Meditations, the first book starts paying gratitude to the different people he met, who taught him different things. Now this again, remember, he was not trying to please these people, because he never expected them to see this book. He just wrote it because he felt within him that they had made him what he was. I'll just read the first few lines. He starts, "From my grandfather Verus, I learned good morals and government of my temper. From the reputation and remembrance of my father, modesty and a manly character. From my mother, piety and beneficence, and abstinence not only from evil deeds, but even from evil thoughts. And further, simplicity in my way of living, far removed from the habits of the rich." He came from a very wealthy family, but his mother, he says, taught him to live simply, not live the life of the rich. And he appreciates that in this book. Then he speaks about his teacher, the teacher to whom, now if you look at Marcus's life, what happened was he was from a very prominent family, but he was not part of the royal family. In those times, when the emperor did not have a male heir, they would adopt somebody who they feel would make a good emperor. Adopt. So he was adopted by, actually his adopted grandfather, Hadrian. Hadrian adopted him, Antoninus and Marcus, Antoninus to be his adopted son and Marcus to be his adopted grandson, so that he actually made succession for 2 generations. So he was Hadrian. Those who have worked and lived in England will remember Hadrian's Wall in the northeast of England, where the Romans, were kept away from Scotland. That's Hadrian's Wall. So this Hadrian's adopted grandson is. So he came from, though he was not a royal as a child, he came from a very rich family. And his mother taught him to live not the life of a rich person, and he appreciated that. Then he speaks about his teacher. Look at these words. The teacher was Rusticus. Rusticus was a very famous Stoic philosopher. "From Rusticus I received the impression that my character required improvement and discipline. And from him I learned not to be led astray by sophistic emulation, nor to writing on speculative matters, nor to delivering little orations, nor to showing myself off as a man who practices much discipline. So he is grateful to his teacher for showing him that his character needed improvement. That is tremendous humility coming from the greatest, the most powerful man in the world at that time. Look, Roman emperor was the most powerful man on earth at that time. There was no one could had that kind of power. He could order armies to conquer continents. He was that powerful. But he confesses that his teacher showed him that there were deficiencies in his character, and he was determined from that age to try to correct it. Now, about this Stoic philosophy, a brief. Now, Marcus Aurelius is considered one of the greatest Stoic writers. All his writings reflect Stoic philosophy, which he picked up from the teachers of that time. Stoic philosophy is something which developed first in the 3rd century BC by somebody called Zeno, who was shipwrecked and lost everything. A philosophy which looks at better self-control, developing a virtuous nature, and temperance in one's habits. So Stoic philosophy teaches about 4 great virtues. They say they are great virtues which people must strive to achieve. Those 4 great virtues are wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice. Very briefly, wisdom means our ability to identify what is in our control and what is not in our control. And then it goes on to say, what is in our control, we will change to the better. What is not in our control, we will face that and we will surmount that. Then temperance is we need to be moderate in everything in life, never to go for extremes, etc. And then courage is we need to always have the inner strength to do the right thing, even if it is difficult. Very often the wrong thing is the easy one, right thing is the difficult one. It says we must have the courage. And justice is we must always be fair in our actions to ourselves and those around us. So those are the 4 cardinal virtues of Stoic philosophy. So why I describe that is Marcus's life was greatly influenced by Stoic philosophy. So let's now get on to the book proper after the gratitude section in book 1. Now this is a book which has what could be even repetitions, because it was not written in one day, it was not written from beginning to end. It was just his experiences over a period of time. So if you read the book, what might strike you will be very different to what strikes me. You might see much more beauty in the book than I have seen. I will show you a few things which made me think. A few things I'll take you through during the remaining period of time. He starts with starting the day. How he struggles to get out of bed. Because he is the emperor of Rome. He's the Roman emperor. He has the most comfortable bed on earth. Probably the most most comfortable cushions, etc. So it's a struggle to get out of the bed in the morning because it's so nice there. But he says, did nature make you to lie comfortably in bed? Was that the purpose? It's not. Bees have already started work. Birds have already started work. And here I am, the Roman emperor, or at least a human being. I'm just sleeping in bed. So I need to get out of bed and do what is necessary. So that's how he motivated himself to get out of bed. I'm still struggling, but want to get out of bed at a reasonable time at some stage. Right. And then he speaks about writing epithets for self. Have a few words which you want to embody, which embody you. Who are you? So you have those words and you try to live by those words. For instance, like I would like to be honest, courageous, calm, kind, reasonable. That would be my epithets. I would like to be kind. I'd like to be calm. I'd like to be reasonable. I'm not for a moment saying I'm that, but if I can identify some values, epithets, and write somewhere and say, this is where I want to be, then I try to go there. So Marcus writes some epithets. I mean, he's not writing to me, he's writing to himself. So he writes some epithets and he says, I am trying to go there. So these are some of the epithets that he has. After all, he and I are the same. We are human beings. He wants to be kind, I want to be kind. He wants to be courageous, I want to be courageous. He wants to be honest, I want to be honest. These values are common to all of us, all humanity. Then he talks about awful people. He says, when you wake up in the morning, realize that you will meet awful people during the day. There will be rude people, there will be dishonest people, there will be people who will be inconsiderate to you, who will cut across when you're driving, who will horn behind you, who will make an unreasonable kind of, will shout in the office for something. So he says, you will meet such people. It is, so he just asks us, is a world without such people even possible? It's not possible. So he says, don't get upset or surprised when you meet such people. When you wake up in the morning, you know that you will meet such people. Not everybody is going to be like that, but a few people. So never get upset by that. Be prepared for that. And then, of course, look kindly upon them because they are that for two reasons, he says. One is they probably don't have the wisdom that you have. I mean, people who behave in a particular way have a level of wisdom. Or second thing is training. Your parents have trained you to behave in a particular way. Maybe that person's parents have not trained that person. So to be kind to even awful people, not to get angry with them or vicious with them, because he goes on to say, the worst thing you could ever do if somebody does something wrong to you is to get even. The worst thing is to be like the person. You must never become like the person who hurt you or who upset you or who wronged you, because then you and him are the same. So you must not accept all that. You must courageously face up and do all that, but always preserving your inner dignity. You must never lose your inner dignity when you are in a confrontation with somebody else, because you will meet such people. Be ready. Now he says, for instance, he really says, if you have to sit next to a smelly person, you can do one or two things. Either you do something about it, you stand up and go and sit somewhere else, or you ask that person to go and sit somewhere else, or you accept that some people smell and you will have to bear with it for some time and you sit there and you get off. But what do? Now the person is smelling and we get so irritated, we get angry, we are fuming, we are not saying anything, but we are really struggling with ourselves at that moment. So he says, some people smell, so accept that, either do something about it, but never get agitated over such thing. And coming back to the previous point, he says, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, not to get even. And then, of course, he says, life is, however much we want life to be a dance, life is not a dance, because Lady Fortune will always deliver us blows. We will always have misfortunes in our lives. So we need to be like a boxer who is ready. When the misfortune comes, you recognize it for a misfortune. You look at it and see what's the best way to handle that. The Stoic philosophy which is behind him is to say, do not despair when something bad happens to you. Despairing will not get you anywhere, but recognizing that and assessing how you could become better or how you should handle that is the way forward. Then he goes on to say, keep your identity small. For instance, he says, don't identify you as one particular philosophy, because then what will happen is you will not recognize great things in others. Now, if we become a very, very narrowed Buddhist or a Christian, we would not be open to the great things other religions offer. So he said, keep your identity small, keep it open, so that you can learn and you can get from all sources. Now you might understand, you might feel that, okay, these are just very random points. They are random points because that's how Marcus journaled. So what we do is we pick the random points and keep it with us so that next time we sit next to a smelly person or somebody cuts across our path in the car, we do not get agitated or we don't get angry or get into a confrontation. I remind you, I'm not telling you that I am this. I am trying to be it there. Okay. Then he speaks a lot about ego. He says to strip things out of the legend and see things for what they are. Now we hold various exalted positions like president CCP and president whatever, chairman of this, that and the other, etc. But see them for what they are. This is an administrative task. People have got and put you there, and you do that and get on with life. So for himself, he says, now in Rome, the emperor wore the purple cloak. The purple cloak could only be worn by the emperor. Such a powerful cloak. So he says, what is this cloak? It's just an ordinary cloak. It has been dyed with shellfish blood. That's why it looks purple. Beyond that, there's nothing. So he actually talks about a stain, the purple stain that can be left upon an emperor. He says the cloak can actually stain your thinking. You can become Caesarified. You can think that you're in such a position that rules don't apply to you, that you can do no wrong. So he says not to. Now, this was a time when Roman emperors had so much power, they could do extremely cruel things. His adopted grandfather, Hadrian, once he got angry with one of his secretaries and actually stabbed the secretary's eye with a stick. And nothing happened. He's the emperor, he can do what he wants. When he chose Antoninus as the successor, all other people who aspired to be successors, he told them to commit suicide, so that there will be no challenge to his chosen one. I know that our politicians would also like to adopt similar strategies. But then, he would do that. He could actually order people to commit suicide just because they had aspired to become emperor after him. So that's the kind of power they had. But nothing like that is there with Marcus, because he was very mindful that the purple cloak was simply a cloak. He was very mindful of becoming egoistic and destroying himself in the process. Give me a second, just. Yeah, and he also goes on to say something very interesting. He says, we love ourselves most, but we really worry about the opinions of people for whom we really don't care. We know that fellow is a useless fellow, but when he speaks ill of me, I get very upset. He says, keep your inner scorecard. You know whether you're getting better or worse, whether you're doing right or wrong. So what does it matter if somebody whom you don't anyway respect speaks ill of you? What does it matter? So he speaks repeatedly about an inner scorecard where you know where you are going, whether you're good or otherwise. Now he was a very avid, he used to go and watch plays. So again, a little bit of humanities as well for us. So he used to say that when you watch plays, one is, of course, you can understand more about life. And second thing is, he trained himself to look at his own life like a play, as if he's watching his own life like a play. And then he would realize that, most of the things that are not really all that important. The self-importance that he and other people hold are not very important, because life is after all, a play. So he would train himself to look at his own life, because he was such an avid theatre fan. He would train himself to look at his own life as a play. He would call this zooming out, something like that, where you would see from above what is going on, and that would give a correct perspective, not to worry about inconsequential things. We do worry about inconsequential things quite a lot. There's a beautiful book, I don't know whether you've read that. I was thinking of doing that for this, but the topic is the subtle art of not giving a fuck. So I thought that may not be all that appropriate for the CCP. Only the title of the book is not appropriate, but within that book, Mark Manson, what it speaks about is actually what we should care for, what we should care about, and what we should not care about. That's a beautiful book. The title was too provocative, so I avoided speaking about that. I don't think the president would have been all that happy had I told him that I want to talk about the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Anyway, then of course he speaks about memento mori. Memento mori is remember dying, remember death. He mentions that quite a lot. He says you could live life right now. All of us could live life right now. Do what you're doing at that moment as if this is the last thing that you would do, so that you would be kind, compassionate, you would take a lot of effort in what you're doing, because it would be very important if it's the last thing that you're doing. Now he says, when you tuck your child into bed in the night, remember that you could live life that moment, the child could live life that moment, and to take appropriate care in tucking your child to bed. I mean, he was not talking about detachment. I don't think so. I think, at least that's my interpretation. My interpretation is he was speaking about connecting with the child at a deeper level. Even the act of tucking the child into bed would be so important. And he had reason to do that because he's lost 6 children. He had to bury 6 of his children. Marcus Aurelius lived in the middle of the Antonine Plague. So may have been the plague, may have been other diseases. 6 of his children died, and he had to bury 6 of them. So for the remaining child or so, tucking the child into bed was so important to him, because he was never sure whether either of them would survive. And he wanted to connect that deeply. And he goes on to say, there is only one thing that we own. Now this is very connected to Buddhist philosophy as well, and maybe other religious philosophies. He says we own only one thing, that is this moment. We do not own the past, we do not own the future. We might have regrets about the past, we might have anxieties about the future, but we own only this moment. In this whole world, we own only this moment. And what we do at this moment is all that matters. So let's do good, he says. And he goes on to say, at least tell himself, do it now. Because he was also like us, procrastinating often. He would say, do it now. He was also struggling with inner resistance that we do. He says, the fool is always getting ready. But remember, we own only this moment. So do it now. If you have to do something, do it now. Ryan Holiday, who translated the newest meditations, he speaks about this instance when his friend called and he told his friend, I'm a little busy, can I speak to you, next week? And his friend went on a hike over the weekend and fell from a precipice and died. So he says, that's really affected me, because we own only that moment. You must be knowing about Kobe Bryant, who was was it basketball or was it basketball, right? Yeah, was it Kobe Bryant? Yeah, he was offered $50 million to come for not 50, something like $5 million to appear to sign a contract to appear for something. That day he said, I promised to take my daughter for another game, and he didn't want to go for that. He didn't go. He spent that day with the daughter, and both of them died a few days later in a helicopter crash. So at least he never would have seen the $5 million, but he had that time with the daughter. So what Marcus says is, you own this moment. Do not do not postpone anything, and deal with what needs to be done right now. And Marcus speaks about dealing with gains and losses. Accept it without arrogance, let it go with indifference. You must be like a rock in the ocean, where things happen, things go off. He talks about another rock. He says, when you throw a rock, the rock did not gain anything going up. The rock did not lose anything coming down. He says, whenever something bad happens, it will affect you only if you judge it to be harming you. But if you look at it as an obstacle to be overcome, you would do that. So he speaks a lot about dealing with gains and losses. The military gains, the empire, children, everything that he speaks about how to lose, how to face that. He speaks about how to face obstacles. Obstacle is the way. I've quoted this part in just about every speech I made at the CCP. He speaks, there's a beautiful sentence which says, impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What stands in the way becomes the way. When something obstructs us, we look at, okay, that door is closed. Where is the open door? We look around for the next opportunity and go on. And that is how we all, the CCP, everybody, so the SLSIM did brilliant work under Ganaka last year. The CCP did work, all others as well did. I mean, Shehan, all of others, specialties also did. We did a lot for patients, etc. We did not crumble when things collapsed around us. We were resilient enough, and what was standing against us, we made that the fuel in our fire and went forward. Marcus goes on to say, whatever that is thrown at the fire becomes fuel for the fire. That's how we must be. Obstacle is the way forward. He speaks about sympathia. Sympathia is our interconnectedness. Even the bad people, good people. We should not harm others because we are all interconnected. I might harm somebody, and that in some other way will come back and harm everybody. So a beautiful analogy that he brings up is, what is bad for the bee is bad for the hive. If you harm a bee, the hive will suffer in some way. It's the same way. What is bad for the hive will be bad for the bee. So as human beings, we must not do anything which harms the society, because what harms the society will be ultimately harm us. So he speaks about this interconnected of human beings and institutions. And he says, go to the seat of intelligence. He speaks about teachers and mentors. There's a very interesting story about Marcus. As emperor of Rome, one day a friend of his met him coming out of the palace wearing the purple cloak and carrying a bag. And asked, where are you going? He said, I'm going to see my teacher. A teacher? You're the emperor. He said, no, there is so much more that I need to learn to become better. So even the emperor of Rome would go to a teacher. His teacher was Sextus. In the gratitude section, he speaks about Sextus as well, what he learned from Sextus. So we are never too big to have a mentor. I think that is one fundamental mistake that we do in life. When we go into big positions, like even say, universities and hospitals, you become director generals and vice chancellors and so on and so forth, very powerful positions. How few of them have mentors? How few of them would actually speak their problems and thoughts with others and get some advice from them? So mentors and teachers are essential. Marcus Aurelius says, go straight to the seat of intelligence and learn from them. He learned from Sextus even as the emperor. He speaks about tranquility. Now this is an important thing. He says, very simply, to do less is to do more. Learn to say no to inconsequential things, because we are bombarded with so many tasks. But if we try to do everything, we will not do anything properly. He says, look carefully at what's ahead of you. Choose what is really important and give it your best shot, as if it's the last thing you're doing. But get away from inconsequential things, because they will only drain you and take you away from the more important task. So ultimately, to do less will be to do more. Most problems anyway sort themselves out. There was a great Stoic philosopher called Seneca. He was banished to an island by one of the emperors. So he used to get letters, and he would not open letters for 1 month. And his logic was, after 1 month, he'll open the letters, and most of the problems would have been solved by that time. By the time he opened the letters, most of those problems would have been solved anyway. So he would only have a few important problems left to sing. So it is very important even for us, because we just get bombarded by so many tasks, to choose what we feel is important. And then, of course, he tells us that fame fades. You might be the greatest person at this moment of time. A few years down the line, people will not remember you even. He says, look at all the great emperors Rome has had, nobody remembers their names even. And I am here today. Nobody will remember my name in a few years' time, because when other emperors come, that's that. Of course, when people don't want to be remembered, they kind of get remembered. So Marcus has been remembered after 2000, but nobody knows what happened to the other emperors who were around them. I mean, Hadrian, only thing we remember is that Hadrian's wall, but nothing else. So most of the other emperors we've forgotten. Now, something very poignant struck me recently. I saw my own photograph was there hanging at the CCP office. It's good to have my photograph there. Then of course, we lost one of our presidents, past presidents, Dr. Selvi Pereira, a few days ago. Her photograph is also there. But if you look at the general physician, she was a general physician community today, I don't know how many would have even heard of Dr. Selvi Pereira, right? She was a great person who did so much. But then, that's how life is. After some time, your photograph is there. Maybe when 50 years down the line, when, these photographs will also not be there. And, no one will remember us. So Marcus reminds us that fame fades. Photographs you might become only a photograph after time, no one remember me. So while you live, do good deeds so that, you've done something, and that's that. Because fame will never last. Then, of course, I started this talk by speaking to you about how he managed to get out of bed in the morning from the very comforting bed of you've seen Asterix and all that, you've seen those beds. I mean, they look so tempting to go and lie down. Marcus Aurelius somehow got out of the bed in the morning. He speaks about ending the day. He says, wash dust off this earthly life. He's had a lot of problems. He's met some awful people. His own trusted general tried to assassinate him. And his wife was also implicated in that effort to assassinate him. He lost 6 children. He had to battle with the plague and all that. So he would have had problems every day of his life. Every day of his life. And then when he was ending the day, he would say, wash dust off earthly life. So he probably went for one of those Roman baths to really wash the dust off. And when he got to bed, he probably did some journal writing and probably read some philosophy to overcome all his mind would have fallen that during the day due to all the problems, to rejuvenate himself to where he was. He tells himself that we will get jarred in life. Something unexpected will really shake your life. Or we will slip. We will speak rudely to somebody. We'll hurt somebody. We will do something bad. But then when you wash off the earthly dust, you bring yourself back. He says this, the Stoic philosophers talk about something called logos. Logos is the rhythm through which world operates, the humanity or the environment operates. There is a rhythm. So, and that rhythm is a good rhythm, and then you can get back there. So not to get despaired if you've had a bad day, if you've been bad even. So you wash off the earthly dust and get back where you are. Get back to the rhythm so that you can be the good human being tomorrow. So I will conclude quoting to you my most favorite paragraph in his book. It says, concentrate on what you have to do. Fix your eyes on it. Remind yourself that your task is to be a good human being. Remind yourself what nature demands of people. What nature demands of people. Then do it without hesitation and speak the truth as you see it, but with kindness, humility, and without hypocrisy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.